Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. Today, we're going to keep going on the year 1947, which corresponds to the chapter 1947 in The Devil and Us, a memoir of you and me. It's Sunday, the 28th of April, 12:15 p.m. my time, which is Mountain Time, 2 hours behind Eastern Standard Time. And let's get right back to it. So let's just let's just pick up where we left off, because it's not a bad idea. So let's just watch the original 1947 ABC News report of Roswell UFO crash one more time.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection. Late this afternoon, a bulletin from New Mexico suggested that the widely publicized mystery of the flying saucers may soon be solved. Army Air Force officers reported that one of the strange discs had been found and inspected sometime last week. Our correspondents in Los Angeles and Chicago have been in contact with Army officials endeavoring to obtain all possible late information. Joe Wilson reports to us now from Chicago. The Army may be getting to the bottom of all this talk about the so-called flying saucer. As a matter of fact, the 509th Atomic Bomb Group headquarters at Roswell, New Mexico, reports that it has received one of the discs, which landed on a ranch outside Roswell. The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico, and the rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brizell was the man who discovered the saucer. Colonel William Blanchard of the Roswell Air Base refuses to give details of what the flying disc looks like. In Fort Worth, Texas, where the object was first sent, Brigadier General Roger Ramey says that it is being shipped by air to the AAF Research Center at Wright Field, Ohio. A few moments ago, I talked to officials at Wright Field, and they declared that they expect the so-called flying saucer to be delivered there, but that it hasn't arrived as yet. In the meantime, General Ramey describes the object as being of flimsy construction, almost like a box type. He says that it was so battered that he was unable to determine whether it had a disc form, and he does not indicate its size. Ramey says that so far as can be determined, no one saw the object in the air, and he describes it as being made of some sort of tinfoil. Other Army officials say that further information indicates that the object had a diameter of about 20 to 25 feet, and that nothing in the apparent construction indicated any capacity for speed, and that there was no evidence of a power plant. The disc also appeared too flimsy to carry a man. Now, back to Taylor Grant in New York. There was important activity within the UN Security Council today.
And there you go, ladies and gentlemen. The story of Roswell. Now, Roswell and 1947 begin the UFO narrative, which is at an absolute pitch right now. Right? It's one of the hottest topics in the world, and you could make the case psychologically that people are talking about extraterrestrials because it's another possible salvation of the human race. So we look to be on the brink of destroying ourselves through religious fundamentalism, the absence of enlightened figures in these religions who can speak in the living moment about the will of God, as opposed to referencing ancient scrolls or the words of millennia dead prophets. As a general rule, you want to get your spiritual advice from a living teacher. Okay? Simply put, you want to get your spiritual advice from a living teacher. So if you want to understand what enlightenment is from the Buddhist perspective, you go and see a Buddhist master who has attained enlightenment. Okay? And he will give you the prescription, or she will give you the prescription to achieve this. Is enlightenment the same thing as having God in the Abrahamic sense? It's a very interesting question. Most of the Eastern religions focus on dormant human potential, although the Hindu system defers to other gods quite a bit. The Ayurvedic system defers to Shiva quite a bit. So there are gods in the Hindu system. But amidst all this, there's another concept that gets lost. Okay? And that is the concept of the creator. Now, the creator is that which created all, not just the physical world, but the astral world, the causal world, the mental world, and the spiritual worlds, all the way up to the abode of the divine force, which is extremely mysterious and indescribable. Okay? Cannot be laid down to paper, cannot be documented in any way, shape, or form. This may sound like a riddle, but it's just the way it is. If you go into this region contemplatively in meditation, you will have the experience of it, but it will be very difficult to express the experience. Okay? Because all the rules of reality are non-existent in the world of the Creator. And when I say the rules of reality, I mean the multidimensional reality, not just the physical laws of science, like the Newtonian laws and these things. I mean all law, okay? Now, one of the most fascinating descriptions I've ever received of the abode of the Creator is from a text called the Anurag Sagar by Kabir, who, as I've said before on my podcast, is probably the teacher who has influenced me the most. And the reason is Kabir introduces what he calls the two fundamentals of God, which are sound and light, and how these can be experienced in meditation, literally. This is not a figurative statement. You literally tune into the sound current, and it expresses itself in different ways depending on the dimension it's going through and the dimension your consciousness is attuned to. And then the light is a form of the sound, an expression of the sound, an ancillary to the sound. And those two things, sound and light, define all of our reality. Okay? Now, it's interesting that all the three lower senses go away in the higher worlds. So there's not really a tactile sense. I mean, there is in parts of the fourth dimension. There's a very tactile sense there, okay? And tactile is the sense of touch. There's no smell, and there's no taste, okay? So of the five senses, the only two that are really of any utility to the soul are sound and are vision and hearing, what you see and what you hear, and that forms the primary reality. Everything else is just an adjunct, a sensory accessory to aid mammals in this world. Okay, so the ability to touch things. You want to feel the ground when you're walking, otherwise you would just keep falling over, right? You want to taste your food, because oftentimes taste denotes things that are bad for you, like poison and things like this. And you want to be able to smell. But smell is profoundly diminished in human beings when you compare it to other mammals, like the big cats in the jungle here, and bears and dogs and things like this. I mean, their sense of smell is through the roof, because smell is much more important in their survival, okay? But for human beings, the two senses that define our spiritual nature are seeing and hearing, okay? And let's get back to the text. So the alien phenomenon comes in, and boy, oh boy, people just go crazy, okay? They just go crazy. And we're getting all kinds of responses to this now. We're getting Tucker Carlson saying they're not from another planet, they're interdimensional. Well, I don't think anybody ever said that they weren't interdimensional. I suppose in the early days of the UFO movement, there was this idea of traveling from different planets and stuff like that. But all you have to do to begin to have a foothold in what's going on is understand what a human being can do. Okay? We human beings, as documented by the various spiritual paths on this planet, can project our consciousness into other dimensions. We can experience the other side of life where the dead live. All of these things are available to human beings with the requisite amount of discipline, sincerity, and persistence. You will break through. You will go to the other side. I've never met anyone who's taken up spiritual practice in earnest, and in earnest practiced for a year, sincerely, okay, and not had some success. So we know that we can leave our bodies and we can project our consciousness. All right. What about life on other planets? What about life in other dimensions? What about life in below us, in the earth? There's life in the earth as well. There's most of the gods are real. Most of the races documented by human beings are also real. You know, fairies, pixies, goblins, gnomes, what they call the duende over here, which is Spanish for goblin as well. We have them up here in the Talamanca Mountain. They're accessible to anybody who has the ability to communicate with them. We're literally surrounded by life all around us. The idea that these are things coming from space is the utility of the material consciousness to define the phenomenon. So again, you got to go back to the materialism and the Holy Massive Language podcast I did, where I explain what materialism is. And that word has been greatly maligned. To recapitulate or recapture some of what I said in that podcast. So materialism is to make material, to materialize, to be fascinated with materializing things. This is what materialism is. It's not money. It is in our time. It's been equated with greed, cupidity, but it isn't. Okay? So the material mindset has come to dominate the first world, and the first world is the one talking about UFOs the most. Isn't that interesting? Okay? So, because we look at it through a material mind rather than through an understanding of spirit, we put a very material interpretation on it, which is life forms coming from another planet in a spaceship, which is the most material possible definition of what's going on. Now, as it stands, or as it happens to be, that's exactly what happened in Roswell. Now, there's work out there on what's called the Roswell deception. In my opinion, discard it. Most of the people propagating these ideas are discreditable, and if you investigate them a little bit and find out where they're coming from, you'll see what I mean. Okay? And that's usually all you have to do is investigate somebody a little bit. You know, who is this person? Why are they speaking about these things? You know, who's Stephen Greer? Why has he become the voice of disclosure, this Orthodox gay Jewish man in Washington? There you go. There's a good starting point. I'm not going to answer all the questions for you. Do some of your own work. Okay? So, and why has there become such a concerted effort to control this narrative in the last 10 years or so? Which is really when Stephen Greer kicks off in about 2003, but really becomes a household name around 2010, 2012. Now, Stephen reinforces the material idea of the extraterrestrials. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, he speaks in very specific physical detail, recovering downed spacecraft. He's part of a team, whoever set up this team, I don't know, but he's part of a team that recovers downed spacecraft. Okay? Well, how does that correspond to interdimensional? Well, I suspect to travel interdimensionally, you would need a portal. And as coincidence would have it, I wrote a book about one of the most powerful portals on the planet, which is Stardust Ranch in Buckeye, Arizona. And I befriended John Edmonds, who lived there for 2.5 decades, died in 2022 and moved there in 1997. So yeah, 2.5 decades almost exactly. I experienced the portal myself. I had portals opening up in my home here in the Talamanca Mountains while writing that book. I document this in podcasts I was interviewed on. There was a point where a portal about the size of a basketball was opening up in my home. And you wouldn't even know it was there unless you walked through it. And when you walked through it, you were struck by a smell. The principal characteristic of the portal was a smell. And the smell was coppery, metally, rubbing alcohol. There's an antiseptic nature to it, like that smell you get in institutionally sanitized environments like schools and hospitals, that has that very chemical smell from all the chemicals they use to kill the bacteria on the floor. Had a bit of that smell as well. And when I say coppery, I mean like blood. If you've ever been around a large pool of freshly spilled blood, that was the smell. Not a pleasant smell. Not completely offensive, like, you know, your dog defecating beside you or something like that. No, I don't mean to be gross, but a less than pleasant smell. Now, when the portal was open, things would happen in the house. That sofa over there, which weighs over 150 pounds and takes 2 strong men to move, pick up and move, moved back about 2 feet with my son on it. Now, this would have been November 2019? Or, yeah, around November 2019, all of this was going on. At one point, a ball of white light appeared in my home. My wife snapped a photo of it. And, you know, it was really kind of freaky. And subsequent to all of this, I ended up speaking with some people at Harvard University who were interested in doing an experiment at Stardust Ranch. And it had to do with medical physics, was what they called it. And they wanted to put a little bit of equipment in the ranch and study John. And they interviewed me first. They approached me first rather than John. John had a reputation of being a little bit difficult to approach at times. And so I spoke to them, and they asked me a bunch of questions. They said, did anything happen when you were working on the book? And I said, yeah, actually, a number of things happened. I had this portal open up. While the portal was open, things moved in my home, heavy things. I had this ball of white light, and my wife took a picture of it, and immediately the assistant to the principal in the experiment, who had a PhD in medical physics, and at the time I heard that, I didn't even know such a discipline existed. The assistant was a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard, in the Harvard Medical School, and he said, may I get a copy of that picture? I said, sure. And immediately after the interview was over, I found the picture on my computer and I sent it to him. And I was quite taken aback. About 2-3 weeks later, I received what I would call a spectral analysis of the picture. And it was in 4 quadrants. It looked like, some of them looked like X-rays. And he had used some form of scientific analysis to try to determine what this was. And the word I got was, this is not fluorescent light, this is not incandescent light, this is not candle light, this is no light that we know of. And I asked him, I said, how do you know? He said, well, light has certain heat signatures. We measured the picture for those heat signatures, and they're not there. And I said, how's that possible? He said, well, that's an excellent question. I said, okay, then what was the light? He said, we don't know. Right? Now, this happened right in my house with my wife while we're lying in bed on a Saturday morning. A lot of weird stuff happened writing Stardust Ranch, which is why I feel compelled to add my voice to these topics, because I think that guessing at what they are, like Tucker Carlson is doing and other people are doing, is not going to give you any answers. You have to have some experience with these things. Okay? And then when you have this experience, then you start to recontextualize what's going on. So for me, because I had began a meditative practice at the age of 17, I was well and familiar with the supernatural already. I'd already, throughout my life, had contact with dead people. Not something I initiate or control. Okay, I'm not a medium. I've said this before, but in the course of my life, where certain conditions are present and a spirit is able to speak into a circumstance, if there's a group of people somewhere at a cottage or somewhere and something wants to speak, generally I will be targeted as the person that they speak to, because I guess they perceive me as the most receptive. So I've dealt with the dead, and when I say dealt with the dead, I mean had experiences, brought information out that I could not have known unless I had actually communicated with the people, and then had what I call physical tie-offs. A physical tie-off where something happens in your timeline, in your event line, and it corroborates to the experience with the dead spirit. Okay? So it's, and you should always be looking for these things, by the way, as you spiritually grow. One of the key indicators that you've had a spiritual experience is it's first experienced inwardly, and then you'll get an indication in your physical timeline a few days later that, hey, this was real. Don't forget what happened in meditation Sunday night. We're doing this Wednesday morning, so you understand the importance of what happened Sunday night. That wasn't your imagination. You really spoke to this being. And then when those things start to happen to you, they freak you out a little bit. So this started for me in my early 20s. I'm 57 now. Now this doesn't mean it happens all the time. Okay? The way my life has gone in terms of consciousness unfoldment is I've been given one of very many different experiences. Okay? One of all kinds of experiences. So I'm getting a little off track here. So 1947, the ship crashes. Some people say it's a deception. I'm telling you, no, it really happened, okay? It really happened. And this is what government does, right? Government and the intelligence agencies, and what we'll call, for lack of a better term, without wanting to invoke politics or offend people, what we'll call the deep state, the invisible powers. And they're there, right? You don't really believe Justin Trudeau is leading Canada, do you? You don't really believe Joe Biden is leading the United States, do you? I mean, clearly there's a force behind these people. And it's no different on the right wing either. I mean, there's a force behind Donald Trump. A lot of it's in Jerusalem. There's a force behind Pierre Poilievre in Canada. A lot of it's in the fossil fuel industry. So I'm not trying to single people out, but like there is invisible power, unelected power, power that never speaks to the public from a podium in this world, and it is the most potent power on the planet. The people we're given to interact with as our leaders they're not really leaders, okay? So we get the doll body. Now the alien that was alive after the crash identified itself as AIRL, AIRL, of the Domain Expeditionary Force. Now, according to her, and there really a gender couldn't be assigned, but we're going to say her because that's the way the book was written. Okay, the people, or the woman who telepathically interacted with the extraterrestrial in captivity after the Roswell crash, identified the being as more of a more feminine nature. So there you go. Now, according to her, the role of the Domain Expeditionary Force is to preserve and protect the property of the domain. And while they were on a mission to investigate what she called burning clouds, radioactivity, and explosions, the Scout alien spacecraft was struck by atmospheric lightning, which caused the pilot to lose control of the disk. Now, this race of extraterrestrials has intentionally refrained from contacting humans because its ethics are to observe and not interfere. But they have been to the Earth several thousands of years ago and were familiar with the Sanskrit language of the Vedic hymns. That's interesting, don't you find? Humans of that time period would report spacecraft as Vimana, mythological flying palaces or chariots. Now, by the 15th day, Matilda, who was the army secretary who was interviewing Errol, and this was by Errol's choice. Many other people were higher up the food chain, higher rank in the military. More important people were brought before this extraterrestrial. The only one that the extraterrestrial would communicate with was this woman named Matilda, who I think was a private or a corporal or just a secretary in the situation there. Now, the first thing that Matilda had to do was to assist Errol to develop a stronger grasp of the English language and the core aspects of our culture and religious beliefs. Now, the gallery of military staff and psychologists supervising and monitoring the interviews would prepare questions in advance for Matilda to present to Errol. But rather than answer direct questions, Errol chose to give specific information. Now, here's a quote directly from the book. I will provide information to you that I think will be beneficial to the well-being of the immortal spiritual beings who comprise humanity, and that will foster the survival of all the myriad life forms and the environment of Earth, as it is a part of my mission to ensure the preservation of Earth. Personally, it is my conviction that all sentient beings are immortal spiritual beings. This includes human beings. Now, for the sake of accuracy and simplicity, I will use up a made-up word, ISBE, immortal spiritual beings, because the primary nature of an immortal being is that they live in a timeless state of is, and the only reason for their existence is that they decide to be. An immortal spiritual being is material and exists outside of, is immaterial, and exists outside of space and time. Every ISBE has an individuated spirit and a unique identity, power, awareness, and ability. Errol says that there are many other intelligent life forms in the universe. All right? Well, there's that. All right, so there is life in our universe. There's no way that everything that's visiting us is simply interdimensional. It's too facile an explanation. Errol referred to one of these life form races colloquially as the Old Empire, simply because that race of immortal spiritual beings inhabited Earth before the Domain took control, and that this race had bases of operation in our solar system. Now, the Old Empire employed a form of electronic screen or net. If, after the death of the body, an immortal spiritual being attempts to penetrate the forescreen, then it is subjected to an extremely high electrical shock, which results in the erasure of all its memory, including the totality of all past lives. Now, the shock is intended to make it impossible for the ISBE to remember who they are, where they come from, their knowledge or skills, their memory of the past, and ability to function as a spiritual entity. They are overwhelmed into becoming a mindless, robotic non-entity. After the shock, a series of post-hypnotic suggestions are used to install false memories and a false time orientation in each immortal spiritual being coming back into incarnation on planet Earth. This includes the command to return to the base after the body dies, so that the same kind of shock and hypnosis can be done again and again and again, and quite literally forever. So as such, the old empire has essentially been using the Earth as a prison planet for potentially millions of years. Now, this is an idea that comes up a lot. It's a Gnostic idea. It's a Kabbalistic idea. It's another way of explaining the fall. Okay? So if there's a net around this planet, as this visiting alien is telling us, that would cut us off from the greater reality out there. And not just physically, but in our astral form when we pass and we can't get through the barrier. Okay? So this would be another explanation for the fall of man, and although I'm not sure I believe it, it's far more rational than Lucifer and 1/3 of the angels, okay? That's just... It's not that there isn't a literal correlate to that religious mythology. It's just that the religious mythology is not the literal. You need to decode it, right? The reason the human race invented mythologies and metaphor and similes is to explain something that's difficult to explain, that has no immediate one-to-one explanation, so you create a simile. It's like this. You create a metaphor. You create an analogy. You create a mythology to explain energetic realities in which we live. Now, if this, in fact, is the story of the fall, then it makes a lot more sense than 1/3 of heaven falling, okay? And this old empire would have representatives here that would probably be non-physical and controlling us. And this could very well be one explanation for demons, okay? Because how would they control us? They would control us with terror. Now, eventually the old empire was vanquished from the solar system, but the force field technology that perpetuates this cycle of birth-death amnesia remains hidden and operational. Now, but remember, this information was given to Matilda by Errol in 1947. Okay? So I'm not sure, although I think a lot of what's going on in the world now is the breaking through of this enclosure, right? This idea that we're cut off permeates so many schools of thought now. Flat Earth is infected with this. So in Flat Earth, we live in a realm, and this realm is cut off from the cosmos. It's kind of a prison or a purgatory, if you will. Again, but what is the common theme? Cut off, cut off, cut off, cut off. Okay, so the fall of man from the Abrahamic scriptures cut us off from God, from the universe, from unconditional love, from full knowledge of our true being. Cut us off. Okay? And that to me makes a lot more sense. Really, I think that's much closer to being what the literal truth is than, almost anything else we're getting today. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review. Keep staying tuned. I'm going to go through all of these ideas. And some of these podcasts you might have to watch or listen to more than once, okay? There's a lot going on in them. They seem very deceptive. And I am speaking in the colloquial, working off my manuscript and just riffing off the top of my head. But there's a lot of things coming out that require a lot of thought, okay? Once again, I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.